Welcome to the Biology of Trauma podcast. I am your host, Dr. Aimie. In today's episode, we're diving deep into methylation and the relationship between trauma and toxins to answer the question, does trauma affect our methylation process and our body's capacity to detox? Now, why this episode? Many of us are familiar with the emotional and psychological aspects of trauma. Fewer understand its effects on our physiology and, crucially, our ability to detoxify. And yet the importance of detoxification is crucial because toxins will hold us back in our trauma work. Trauma does not just live in our minds, it resides in our cells, influencing fundamental biological processes. One of these processes is detoxification, or our body's natural ability to eliminate toxins and harmful substances. A buildup of toxins can impede our progress in trauma therapy and healing. It's a two-way street. Trauma affects our ability to detoxify, and toxins affect our ability to process and release trauma. So in this episode, we'll explore the science behind this connection and provide practical insights on what to do about the trauma-toxin connection. You can learn to recognize methylation imbalances and its health issues, support your body's detox pathways, learn nutritional and dietary tools to address the detoxification pathway. I'm very excited about our guest today since he has been a leader in integrative medicine and specifically implementing mental health nutrition at the clinical level. It is hard to be a leader in this field, and I want to acknowledge the effort he has put in to create a very different experience for his patients. Dr. Albert Mensah, he's been a family practice physician for over 20 years now. He received his medical degree from Finch University of Health Sciences, Chicago Medical School, and then completed his residency at Swedish Covenant, which led him down a different path than conventional medicine. And it leads to the approach that he does now in looking at biochemical imbalances. And we will be talking about one of those with methylation today. So whether you are on a healing journey from trauma, toxins, including toxic people and emotions in your life, or simply curious about the intricacies of the body and the inner world as it relates to trauma and how it affects our detoxification pathway, then this episode is for you. Does trauma affect our methylation process and our body's capacity to detox? Let's get started. With that, I want to start with just this big overview of detox. And there can be heavy metals, there can be other toxins, but especially when someone has methylation imbalances, we know in theory that that's going to affect their detoxification pathways. But can you kind of give us that big picture of the relationship between methylation and detoxification, and why, if someone is working to do a detox, why they should even care about their methylation?
Okay. So detox has been a very big subject for many individuals for a very, very long time now, as people have started looking more at these pathways and looking at what's really wrong. First of all, I have to share that the idea is probably a little bit overstated. Now, that's going to turn a lot of people off right away, but I need people to understand not every clogged pathway produces an effect in the system. Not every challenged detoxification pathway is going to produce either an effect of significance or the particular effect that you're concerned about treating. So identification, first of all, is very, very important. Now, the other side comes into play. Well, what is toxification? Are we talking about viruses, bacteria? Are we talking about chemicals internally that are producing inflammation? Are we talking about molecules that are in the GI system, or toxins in the GI system, right? There are a variety of ways to look at toxicities. So, for example, copper can be a toxic element in the system, and that creates inflammation and oxidative stress. However, if we look at a microorganism, Bacteria fragilis or some other organism along those lines, that can produce gastrointestinal inflammation and therefore toxicity. So I always like to say there are a variety of toxicities, And we need to be very careful about which ones that we're talking about. Now, most of the time we talk about detoxification, people are talking about heavy metals. That's the big thing out there. So let's kind of look at that. First of all, not all metals are alike. And so I tend to get a little bit perturbed when people say, oh, well, I've got heavy metals. And I say, well, which one? Because rubidium is doing nothing for you. I can guarantee you that. Okay. Cobalt is doing nothing for you. I can tell you about that. Technetium, well, that's a whole nother story. Okay. So which heavy metals are you concerned about? They're not all the same. They each is different, as any one of the practitioners looking here and I am. So identification and targeting the specific metal you're concerned about, or perhaps group of metals, is also very, very essential. And why is that? Because there are multiple mechanisms to get rid of each one of those metals that you're referring to. So if you lump everything together, then already you failed, because you're going to assume one treatment is going to remove all of those without realizing that even if you did remove them, if there's a subtle methylation pathway reliant program designed for this one, but not this one, you're going to reaccumulate very quickly, or you're not going to truly detoxify. So specificity, first of all, is one of the things that I like to talk to folks about. We've got to know exactly which ones we're talking about. And, medicine healing is about cause effect. Your patients are looking to get better. And if you say that metals in general are the problem, and you generally treat the metals, and they still come back and say, well, I'm still depressed, or I'm still anxious, or I still have all these other symptoms, I still have that body fatigue, well, I still have that foggy brain, then we've already failed in the eyes of the patient. Okay. So we have to look at very specifically cause and effect. Is it this particular metal, that particular metal? And therefore, of course, identification becomes key. And then correlation. Let's say you've got a particular pathway. Lots of people talk about, the sulfur pathway, for example. Okay. And how that may be challenged. Many people often do DNA tests, okay, to say or suggest, gosh, you know what? I see I've got this SNP. I've got a double blah, blah, blah in the S pathway and da, 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 da. And so I have to make sure I take this and this and this and say, hold on here now. Common mistake. A gene does not mean activity. A gene means potential. It's biochemical testing that tells you if that potential has been realized. So, folks, if you're treating your patients based upon SNPs, you're already moving in the wrong direction. Okay? Because we have DNA repair mechanisms that undo what it is that a SNP would do. Millions of times a second. Okay? Millions of times a second. So if your analysis for methylation is based upon a DNA test or an RNA test or whatever genetic test, you've already moved down the wrong pathway. Okay? So now when we talk about methylation and detox pathways, let's really talk about this with understanding of a true detox challenge and methylation. You've done the right testing. You've identified the right agents that are problematic. And now you're looking to kind of help correct that. Okay. So with correction, of course, there are going to be two approaches automatically. You've got water that's rising from the kitchen sink because you got a little faucet going on there. You don't want to just turn off the faucet. You want to bail the water out, okay, so that you don't have flooding. So those are two parts. So how do we get rid of the metals that we're talking about? Number one. So many people would say, well, we're going to use these binders, we're going to use activated charcoal, we're going to use a variety of things. And that may be fine. And some of these methodologies can work extremely well. But you know what? Many of us don't turn off the faucet. And we wonder why, gosh, you're still having that symptom? Well, because there's still that accumulation that's happening. And why is that? Because we didn't correct the actual issue that created this in the first place, which is often methylation related. So that's another reason to check the methylation status of the patient. So now there are a couple of ways to do that. The first way And the simplest way is by doing actually a whole blood histamine test. Now, this is not the same as systemic histamine, okay? The whole blood histamine measures specifically the H1 variant, which is in the brain, the neurotransmitter, not the gut-related or allergy-related H2, H3 receptors. These are different creatures. And so you're saying, well, gosh, I've never heard of that distinction. I'll make it real simple. Contact DHA Labs, Direct Health Access Labs, for a whole blood histamine test. Now, histamine and methyl have a diametrically opposed relationship. So it's an inference that kind of leads us to the diagnosis of methylation. So high histamine, it's like being on a teeter-totter. For those of you who are a certain age, you don't remember what that is, but a teeter-totter was a device, a mechanism that was on the playgrounds, and kids would go up and down them. You know, one kid rises up, the other one goes down, and there's a little fulcrum in the middle. But it's the same for methylation and histamine. So when histamine is high, it's the exact opposite relationship. Methyl is low. And when histamine is low, we deduce methyl is high. Now, that's research-based. It's been done, more than 50 years ago. The simple way of putting it is, if you do a whole blood histamine test, if histamine is high, and for us, high means over the magic number of 70, then methyl is low. Now, what is interesting is that you can look proportionally. If someone is, say, 100, that's a pretty significantly high histamine. Well, that means that their methylation is that kind of much lower, okay? And so when someone comes in at 122, you go, holy moly, that's huge, which means that you are in a deficit the size of the Grand Canyon in terms of where your methyl concentration should be. Now, why am I talking about testing? Well, if you're assuming you've got a deficit in a pathway involving methylation, then you need to have an idea at what level a person is able to methylate with greater accuracy than just saying you're not properly methylating. Not properly methylating is not a very clear, qualitatively reflective assessment, nor is it a quantitatively reflective assessment. You've got to have an idea. Are we talking about, you're about 30% methylating, you're about 50%, you're about 70% methylating or undermethylated, or are you over? Okay. So that's why I talk about testing very briefly. Okay. Now, when we look at treatment, well, for us, treatment is based upon the testing. That's why I brought it up. So if you're an undermethylator, you put together an appropriate program that pours methyl into the system. It takes time. And everyone who works with methylation out there knows this. It doesn't happen overnight. And you let your patients know that. But it's step-by-step improvement over the course of time. Now, the funny thing is, you're so smart out there. We all are. We think we are anyway. And we say, well, we're targeting this piece here in terms of detox. But what you don't realize is the body is far smarter than we will ever be. It says, you're finally giving us methyl. Now we're going to distribute that methyl to every single system that needs methyl. What you're pouring into the system doesn't automatically go to detox. So what I'm saying is that you may not be giving enough when you think you are in a person who is significantly in deficit for methyl molecules. Now, if somebody is in overdrive with methyl, sometimes you have to actually remove it. Okay. And the detox pathways may actually be overwhelmed by competing forces of excessive methyl for the number of receptors that are present per site. It's like playing what's that old game? Where the kids the little music is playing and the kids are all trying to get that little chair when the music stops. Remember that little game? It used to be at the parties. Anyway, that's for us older folks. But what I wanted to share is that we've got to basically look at methyl for what it is. Okay. Now, so let's say there's a blockage in the detox pathway. You've done your identification, you've done your testing, you know what the patient is. Now your question is, what are you going to do to basically fix the problem or correct the problem, shift the problem? Well, what are the methylating agents that you're using? Now, a lot of people talk about methylated B vitamins. I got to tell you something. Methylated B vitamins are not the key factors to methylation. They are not. They are ancillary. They're so ancillary that if somebody's got to spend money on them, you're actually wasting their money. They do not have the effect that you're thinking about. I know people are talking about methyl B12. They're talking about methyl B6. They're talking about folates and blah, 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 blah. Do you know B vitamins are not all created equal? They're not even in the same family from a chemical relationship perspective. So on the one hand, it's a good idea to give a methylated B12, okay? But is it putting methyl into the system in huge amounts? The answer is no. Real simple, folks, real simple. Your top methylating agents are actually methionine, the amino acid, SAMe, and in children, TMG, trimethylglycine. In autistic children, you can go to DMG, dimethylglycine. Okay. These are your big boys. These are your big guns, or big girls. We'll be equal about this, okay? These are your powerful factors. Now, when you give these agents, what's going to happen is that those challenged pathways, let me backtrack. Why are the pathways challenged in the first place? They're challenged because there's an enzyme usually that is either in deficit or an abstention of methyl molecules, or that enzyme is actually genetically challenged by design to not function properly, no matter how much money you get, a methyl you give. So it's important to really identify that part. That is correct. But how you move beyond the blockages, of course, is going to be a challenge. And that has to be determined as well. But your first step is the identification of methylation status, and then provide what is needed to help the methyl or shift the methyl. Now, I want to tell you something about folic acid. Now, this is going to surprise a lot of you. What you may not realize is that folic acid, there are double agents. What they do is, here's a cell, and think about the nucleus. So imagine with me a cell, the nucleus of the cell, the cytoplasm of the cell, and then the cell membrane. All right. Folic acid, dives into the cell, right? Dives into the cytoplasm. And it is just donating methyl molecules all over the place. In the cytoplasm, it is a powerful methyl donor. So it's doing a great job for everything that's cytoplasmic. But then, when you're not looking, it dives into the nucleus of the cell, where your DNA sits. And do you know what it does? It removes 10 times as much methyl as you ever got donated in the cytoplasm. Now, I know we're doing something strange. We're going back to molecular cell biology, but that's where the world is going these days, back to cell biology. So let's ask the question, what is in the nucleus of the cell? Your DNA, euchromatin, heterochromatin. All of those pieces require methyl molecules to function properly. Protein synthesis can't happen. Protein synthesis, which makes the enzymes which you need for detox pathways and removal, cannot happen if you do not have proper concentrations of methyl. You follow me here, folks? Now then, so we're at the cellular level. So if folic acid gets into the nucleus and it's now demethylating your system, you wonder why your patients aren't getting better? Well, we hear this one a lot. But wait, Dr. Mensah, you know what? My patient did better. I actually asked, how long were you following them? It's like, well, a month. I said, well, here's the key. Because of that initial boost that folic acid gives in the pathway of methylation itself, you may see some actually positive results for 3 months. Count it, folks, 3 months. And then it goes right back down. And your patients are saying, well, I really, that didn't last. I don't feel better. So you may increase the dosage of the folic acid, and all you're doing is actually decreasing the methylation at the level of DNA. So already that's the wrong approach. Okay. The simple adages in medicine are true. If you're not getting the results you're looking for from the process you're using, you've either got the wrong diagnosis, the wrong tools, or not enough of the right tools. Okay. So we're sitting back and we're saying, well, gosh, I'm pretty sure I had the right tool. Everyone knows folic acid, blah, blah, blah. But after 3 months, I'm getting no effect. no matter how much I give. In fact, my patient seems to be getting worse. Now, if you had tested their methylation status, you know they're an undermethylator. So knowing which methylating agents are truly the powerful ones and the useful ones is very, very key. Now, if you said, my patient did really, really well, guess what? Did you check the methylation status? Maybe it's because they're over methylators. It doesn't make sense if you're over methylated and you've got a Matahari double agent hanging around known as folic acid and it removes methyl. That's exactly what you need for an over methylated person. Okay. But for an undermethylated person, back to our story here, for an undermethylated person, folic acid is the wrong thing. Beyond 3 months, it is the wrong thing to give an undermethylated person. So when you're trying to detox, you're trying to get that system restarted. You're trying to bypass these blockages that you've done your diligence with DNA testing and so forth. Now you're seeing no effect because you've got the wrong agent. So now we go back to the methionines, go back to SAMe, go back to TMG. Folks, it's not that hard. Those are the 3 big guns to restart your methylation pathways. So now let's say we've opened up the pathways. All right, wonderful. You've got methionine flowing to SAM. SAM is coming out there doing its job, just throwing away methyl to everything that needs it. Okay. But your patient's still not getting better. Well, what's left, right? What's left? The question is, what did you miss? Or what is your patient not telling you? You know how that is. They're not telling you that, oh, on the side, they're taking tons and tons of folic acid because they read it's good for you, while they're taking the methylation product you told them to take. Or, they're eating this certain foods, right? Certain foods that are rich in this product here, and that actually impedes your process. So make sure you also do a very thorough dietary evaluation. Because sometimes folks I'll give you an example. So we deduced that a patient who has postpartum depression, a family history of depression and anxiety, and we determined they are toxic with a very specific metal, copper, right? So now we say, okay, the detox pathways for copper are blah, 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 blah. And we've addressed all of them. And we figured we turned off the faucet. We're now reducing the copper, and we're using, let's just take one agent out there, N-acetylcysteine, okay? Or we're using, let's say, molybdenum. Don't ever use molybdenum in children, by the way, it stunts growth. So you remove the copper, and then the patient says, I'm not better. And I'm going to tell you a true story. I got a very angry phone call from a husband. It's always my worst nightmare. I'm working with the wife. The husband calls me a week later and says, what did you do to my wife, Dr. Mensah? I said, what do you mean? He said, she's worse than she was before. I said, well, let me take a look. So I'm looking through the chart and I'm thinking, man, I hope I didn't make a mistake. Man, I hope I didn't make a mistake. So I'm looking at all the protocols are in the right place. Everything's working properly. And I asked them, let me ask you something. Are you guys doing anything different? Long story short, the wife was an avid lover of avocados, an avid lover of kale, spinach, broccoli, and almonds. Almonds. What do they have in common, folks? Each and everything I just mentioned is high in copper. So I tell you that because now I'm going to ask you, all these metals you're concerned about, check the diet. Did we turn off the faucet? Not only did they, in this example, not turn off the faucet, they turned it on high gear. So when we checked the copper levels in particular, we found them rising. And I said, oh, no, this does not happen. And you know what? They said to me, well, Dr. Mensah, we stopped the almonds, we stopped the avocados, we stopped everything, and they're still not getting better. And I mean, I had both husband and wife on the phone, and they were just livid because she's more moody, she's anxious, she's more depressed, she's rageful, all these things happening. I said, something's not right here. Folks, you're not going to believe this. They said they had changed nothing. And for some reason, it came to my mind, honestly, it was a divine sort of thing. The universe spoke to me. I said, are you drinking any teas that we don't know about? I heard silence. The wife said to me, well, Dr. Mensah, there's this red tea. I said, where's it from? And she told me blah, blah, blah. I said, uh-huh. So you're drinking the red tea from da-da-da-da, and then you're drinking this eucalyptus tea from da-da-da. I said, are you aware that those things are high in copper? Tea, folks, something as innocuous as tea was actually pouring more copper into the system. So the point of my story here is that part of your detoxification pathway analysis and treatment should also include a good dietary assessment to make sure these same metals are not coming in through the environment as well, because that can also impede your progress. So you guys are so smart. You're always thinking DNA, RNA, you're thinking about the pathways, but then you forget about diet too. And then your dietary folks are thinking, well, I've got it straight because there's a balance between these two things. Folks, let me tell you, you can have a balance between zinc and copper, diametrically opposed metals, in the food. But if your detox pathways can't process copper, all your system sees is copper from the natural agents. Okay. But what I wanted to share is that in sort of a synoptic form, when you're talking about your detox pathways, one of the major pieces you've got to refer to is methylation. And with methylation, there is assessment. And assessment involves more than just the presence of or a qualitative assessment. It's also a quantitative assessment. Now, the two tests that we talked about, the methylation profile and the whole blood histamine. Well, people ask, well, Dr. Mensah, if that methylation profile test is so great, then why didn't you just do it from the very beginning? And I tell them because it's expensive. So for a lot of people, now that test is usually about $390, $450. Okay. And for a lot of people, that's just way too expensive. We try to deal with a wide spectrum of folks who just, a lot of them can't afford it. So that's why we start with the whole blood histamine test. And then we look at what that level is, and then we treat accordingly. Okay. So assessment is key, quantitative, qualitative, then the right tools. So for undermethylated folks, you're talking about SAMe, methionine, TMG. Now, other people say, you know what? Here's a common mistake. They say, well, I checked the homocysteine level, and the homocysteine level was high. And I would say, okay, so why did you do that? Well, because it tells me about my methylation. I said, no, homocysteine tells you nothing about methylation. Not a gosh diddly darn thing. I need you guys to understand that. So don't spend your time wondering what homocysteine is doing. It goes back to traditional medicine. It's reflective of cardiovascular risk. Okay. It is not reflective of the methylation pathway. So do not waste your time there.
I feel like I'm sitting down for a story about my cells and my DNA and methylation, and I love it. I love the storytelling. Thank you. What a gift. I very much appreciate your energy and your explanations and your analogies. I think that they are very helpful and they've landed well for the audience today. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Biology of Trauma podcast. If you are curious to learn more about methylation and the other two biochemical imbalances that play a role in trauma recovery, then I have resources for you in the show notes. You will want to have my guide to the 3 most common biochemical imbalances in mood and mental health. And I find these same imbalances in those with chronic stored trauma patterns. Until these are identified and supported with repair tools, then they will hold you back in symptoms of depression, anxiety, maybe even fatigue and pain. If you know my story, you will know that I discovered that I had all 3 biochemical imbalances, and no wonder I was stuck on my healing journey. Get to know these imbalances. There are personality traits. You can use those to then assess if testing would be valuable. Just take a look at them though. Related podcast episodes include episode 6, The Role of Methylation, and Epigenetics in Mental Health Outcomes. That is with Dr. William Walsh. That was actually part 2 of a 2-part series I did with him on biochemical imbalances. And episode 90, Beyond Talk Therapy with Dr. Robert Lustig, addressing the biochemical basis of behavior and changing our responses. I have a YouTube video that you will want to check out on the copper to zinc ratio for promoting regulation. and the trauma healing journey. It's not just the copper excess, but it's the copper to zinc ratio. There is a ratio that you want to have, and you want to know how to know that you have the right ratio that will promote regulation. I am here to save you time and money by bringing you practical information that will help you accelerate the trauma healing journey. So take a moment, please share this information with others and leave a comment. Your reviews and feedback are how I know how to make this podcast better for you. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. Until next episode, lots of love.